Staff Commodore Ken Frost.
Thank you, Matt. And I think it's kind of cool that we're going to have to break to celebrate the Sears Cup win and their opportunity to go further. The last time I sailed in Sears Cup was 1956. Okay, so here we are, where we are, and we wonder, how come? How many of you have friends that went to the St. Francis because they were directed to the San Francisco Yacht Club? Yeah. So let's adventure in our story, and we'll start at the very beginning. This is Platt's Hall, and Crosby, also known as Henry Bliss Platt, had this theater building. And it was the site of things like Mark Twain talking about things in life. It was the site of many graduations from high school and college. It was a big deal. And he was asked, he sort of asked the local yachtsmen if they would be interested in forming a club. And so they gathered in his office, and so in a very real sense, this building, torn down in 1890, is our first clubhouse. And it didn't last very long because they got really to business. And here's what I mean by business. They met on August 6th and they published all this in the paper on August 8th. They agreed that they would build a building. They decided on an initiation fee. $10, sounds pretty big, huh? And what else did they do? Well, they agreed they'd sponsor 2 annual regattas, and they went on a magnificent cruise, and they were going to have pleasant holiday gatherings. And the biggest thing, if we look back to 1869, was a very deliberate position that they wanted the women to be involved. Now, looking back with today's eyes, the notion that they had a women's lounge and they had a closet with fishing poles so the women could fish off the dock while the men were out sailing doesn't sound very inclusive. But flash back to 1869 and they were way ahead of their time. So here's our house. And this house was really special. The measurer, John Kelly, designed it. And the mast, you see the flagpole coming all the way through the building? It was supposed to look like a mast coming through the ship. And so it was mounted on the mast step on the floor in the building. The flooring and the paneling were bicolored, so you had dark wood and light wood. And they really did a bang-up job, to say the least. Interestingly enough, the little house with a star on it, that was the home of the Pioneer Rowing Club. So on the inside in Mission Bay of the bridge, they rowed. And on the outside, they sailed. So they had this first cruise. And I keep thinking, wouldn't it be fun to do this cruise again? You go to Sacramento, through Vallejo, you get on the train and you go to Colfax, and then you come down afterwards, get on your boat, and go home slowly. The train trip is still possible to Colfax. But think of it in 1869 when the railroad was brand spanking new. Pretty bold. Captain Ed Moody, and I keep thinking now, was that a Bruce Moody, Todd Moody relative? But I never asked that question. When they completed the clubhouse, they invited the city to come and celebrate the grand opening with them in early October of 1869. And they got 800 people to come. So I thought, wow, that's a big number. The population of San Francisco in 1869 was almost 150,000. So it wasn't a big portion of the population, but it was a whole lot of people for that little clubhouse. And they had their first annual regatta. And the first annual regatta is commemorated in a picture in the dining room that shows the emerald. And the second annual regatta is in that picture. So clam bake was a big deal, and you have to understand, here's Todd. Todd, are you related to Ed Moody?
I was not related to Ed.
It's too bad, he did all our flags. So the clam bake was a big deal, and in fact, when you read the Centennial book, our first effort to flash back on our history, it basically implied that we spent so much money on the second clam bake that we were bankrupt and had to get out. I'm here to tell you that's not true. Close, but not true. So then in November, they had a big dinner dance at the club, and not to be outdone, Platt hosted them at the theater on a holiday party at the very end of the year. So Edmund Moody is famous for doing all the flags, and in fact, when he was commissioned to do the flag for the Pacific Interclub Yachting Association, the PICYA, he failed to finish it in 1896 because he died. But you can see the swallowtail original flag with the SFYC on it went away sometime between 1869 and this triangular flag you recognize today, which is in the 1877 annual book. So sometime in that period, we went from a swallowtail flag to a regular one. Here's an invitation to come to the opening of the clubhouse. And because it's hard to see, because it's kind of faded out, it's over there in that scrapbook. So if you really want to come, pick up a card and head on out to Long Bridge. This is a picture of San Francisco as it was. And I wonder, how did they get that drawing? Long Bridge, we'll try this technology and see if it works. No, too bad. Long Bridge is right there. And it was a cool place, and we thought we would be there forever, I think. But the city had different plans, but now not well rehearsed. This is the Commodore's ship. This is about a 45-foot steam yacht. And I believe that Platt was chosen to be Commodore because all the rest of the guys had sailboats and they needed a committee boat. This is a report on the very first regatta. And it's hard to see, but the Prometheus was chartered so that they could take people out to watch the race. And they all had a really wonderful time, except right here. It says, on the whole, with the exception of the commissary department, the affair was a success and everyone enjoyed a pleasant day. You know what that means? They forgot the food. They had plenty of drink, they had a band, but they forgot the food. And I want to tell you that the Commodore got a letter from the women of the club, the very first one in our history, saying, where the hell's the food? think it's important to remember to flash back on what it was like to sail on a sailboat in 1869, 70, 70.
Look at the
There's a certain absence of things like winches and cleats. There are lots of bosun pins and hoops on the mast. And so it was a whole lot of work to sail. And I wish Strube was here because he's got the brand new boat with the push buttons that brings the sail in automatically. So here's this picture in the bar, or excuse me, in the dining room. And the wonderful thing about this is it shows the Golden Gate before there was a bridge. You see Fort Point. You see the Marin Headlands. And this is Emerald, the winner of both the first and the second annual cup. So they won this flag and the one in the dining room. Now the fun thing about this one is when we got this to recover, it was torn to shreds. This one was the one that was in the mast all the time. And that's commemorated by that Joseph Lee painting there, which is almost identical to the one in the dining room, except the 1870 prize flag is right where the emerald red flag is in this painting. So there's 1879. You can see it's in much better shape. It was easy to recover. And again, just for diversion, it wasn't easy to get that main in. And can you name all the sails on those schooners? Yeah. And did you notice they were sailing for $1,000? This is not the Prometheus. It's the Hunt. And the Hunt was the escort vessel for the second annual regatta. But the Prometheus and this were essentially the same. Side-wheeler ferries. So there's your second portrait. And the fun thing is that Peerless, that yacht, won the prize flag. And Stark Vaughn, the sloop on this side, also won. So, in a sense, we've got 4 of the first 6 or 7 winners covered here. The other thing that's wonderful is that in 1870, all of you America's Cup fans understand that James Ashbury challenged for the cup. And he had a great idea that he would challenge the New York Yacht Club. And since he was a member of 4 different yacht clubs in England, he would charge first for one, and then the other, and then the other, and then the other, hoping he'd win. And they said, oh, no. You are going to race against our 4 best schooners, and you have to beat every one of them. Needless to say, he did not take the cup back. But he did come west. He came west on the train. He had made his fortune in railroad wheels. And you know, railroad's a big deal in England, and he also opened the Russian market, and they had a big demand for railroad wheels. So he had a lot of money. And he came west on the train to demonstrate that it worked. And when he got here, we were so thrilled to have him that we turned ourselves inside out. And this is an invitation to come to the reception to participate. And here's see, the bearer of this ticket could go on the brisk. And the brisk was, as they say, anything but brisk. She was about 80 feet and a steam yacht. She was built for, Bill Ralston, founder of the California Bank. heavy investor and underwriting of a whole lot of Comstock load. So they had to take 20 feet out of the middle of it to make it work. But she was still able to take this group in 1870. So one of our treasures coming back is the Ashbury Cup. It's a big, beautiful mug. You can see it in the bar, and it is about that tall. And Ashbury said to us that he was going to give us a cup that was going to be so much more important than the America's Cup that nobody even think about the America's Cup anymore. So we awarded it as our champion trophy along with the prize flag for years thereafter, but it didn't have the same cachet. So we spent a lot of time here now talking about being on Long Bridge. And Long Bridge was behind Rincon Hill. And what do we know about Rincon Hill besides it was a really exclusive real estate place back then? Imagine a $300,000 house. Well, we dug it down. And where did we put all the spoils? In Mission Bay. Because we wanted a railroad center so that Oakland wouldn't get it. So we ripped the hill down. These little kids helped show how gigantic it was. This is from the other side, looking back into Rincon Hill. And these cuts remind me of the cut at the end of Montgomery Street, where it goes into the Embarcadero. And the same stability problem for the buildings up there exists. So this Currier and Ives is from 1872. And I've tried to make it a little bigger so you can see. But if you look carefully, you can see there's dirt on both sides of the bridge, which means we were losing our access to the water. So we had to move. We sold our little house to the railroad for $1,000 in 1872, and we were relatively homeless. Now, we don't think we were truly homeless, but that isn't exactly true because Bill Ralston built the Palace Hotel, and we met in the Palace Hotel from 1872 until into the mid-1950s. So we didn't really leave the city. And this is the course. If you look in the Centennial book, you'll see this course. And the fun thing about it is, every year, even when we were in Sausalito, through that first decade, we sailed this course. Down to Hunters Point, over the Oakland shore, all the way up to Black Collar, sort of, and back. So it was a big day when you were racing on that course. So it's interesting, they put in place a rule that if you won the the annual regatta 3 times in a row, you would retire the trophy. And you can see that Consuelo won it 3 times in a row. However, not by the same owner. Matthew Turner built it, and he sailed it first. And then Isidore Good sailed it second. And John Kelly sailed it third. So the same boat won, but different owners. The fun thing, and I use this as a tease, the next big thing for me to do is to talk about the annual regatta. Because the very next winter is Annie, and that opens up a whole new story. So, two things are important about Rich Ogden. First is that he's the guy who managed to get us incorporated. He's the guy, after Platt tried and couldn't get a quorum, they got it done. The other thing that's important about him is he led the move to Sausalito. It was sort of slow at the beginning, because in 1872 there are articles in the paper saying, the San Francisco Yacht Club is moving to Sausalito. What do you think? And basically what happened are two things. Thing one is, in 1872, there was a collapse in the value of mining stocks. And you know how important mining stocks were to the San Francisco Stock Exchange? It's all they sold. And in 1873, there was the stock market crash. It was called the panic. And it was about the railroad bubble bursting. So it isn't any wonder they were a little slow in committing to build another building. So but in 1877, they started to get serious. And in 1878, they moved to Sausalito. So let's see if I missed anything here. Ogden, Front Street Wharf. Ogden had a big barge, and he'd tow it up the Delta and use it to do pheasant hunting and stuff, and he'd tow it back. So that was served as a clubhouse on the water, and then we had the Palace Hotel. It's interesting that we chose Sausalito, considering that Platt was a member of the board of directors of the Sausalito Land and Ferry Company, and Charlie Harrison was its co-founder, the purchaser of the ferry boat Princess, famous because Jake Wasser's grandfather was the maritime engineer on that boat and brought his family to Sausalito. And they had so much fun on their centennial regatta. They wanted to do it on the 4th of July, but they couldn't because the master mariners took it away. But they had it a little bit later, and they had a great time, and that generated new interest, and the stock markets were recovering, and so they decided to move. And the big idea was, do we go to New Sausalito, which means Water Street? Water Street is now, everybody knows as Bridgeway. But in 1878, there wasn't any bridge. So it couldn't be Bridgeway. Okay. And what happened was Eckley, the vice commodore for the first 4 years of the club, led a split. And the split went to Old Sausalito, and they used the beach for their landing, and they used basically the newest ways to get the boats out of the water. And of course, we all know that as something very different, right? Hurricane Gulch. So we went to Water Street, and Harrison is the guy. So I talked a lot about Harrison. He was wild and woolly, shall we say. He was big in the railroad, and Platt was too, because Platt was doing lumbering on the North Coast, and he lost the lumber schooner when it was being filled on the coast. So he was interested in doing it, and this North Pacific Railroad had the rights to go all the way to Eureka, so they could get the railroad, the redwoods out, and bring them to San Francisco. He's also distinguished because you can see he has lots of tenure as our Commodore. So here's the Princess, just because I wanted to show you that we really did have a boat. And it looks pretty much the same as the Hunt, only the Hunt's picture is so much nicer. Our friend Moody, no relation to Todd, made this beautiful pen and ink sketch which they used as a calling card to come to the club, and it shows the club from the shore side. Mostly we see it from this side, from the water side. And you can see it's not huge, but it was very nice, and we were going to be there forever. Seemed like a good plan to me. And these kids who live in Sausalito, like these two, Ken and Carol, they'd be happy with that. And then this happened. In 1877, there was a huge fire in the clubhouse. Burned it to the water. And in fact, do any of you have club cast buttons?
Thank you, okay.
Okay? Those castings were made from Bakelite buttons that were covered in the early 1980s underneath this clubhouse because they fell out of the clubhouse when it burned. So, if you have one of those, remember that story. So this was done by Coulter. Now you might know Coulter because he was a very, very prolific marine painter. And he has the big painting in the Exchange Building. And he was the illustrator for the Call, the San Francisco Call, the San Francisco Call Bulletin. And he took great delight in his panorama of the San Francisco fire, of showing the Call building burning down, because photography had rendered his job no longer current. Rats. So here's the new clubhouse, and the most amazing thing for all of you who've ever tried to build anything, particularly in Marin, is the clubhouse burned down in March of 1897, and they had it open for opening day, 1898.
Wow.
Now, one of the fun things about this building is when the '06 earthquake and fire occurred, that building was essentially unscathed. And so we offered it to the city of San Francisco for two reasons. Reason one was to provide housing for people, first responder type people who were trying to help rebuild the city, and as a storage space so that they'd have a space to store the stuff necessary to help initiate the recovery. And these are fun because look, this stupid picture says it's 1928, and we all know that it wasn't like this in 28 because we were here in 27. But they didn't ask me when they put these on the picture. So what happened in the intervening time between the '06 earthquake and right before that picture was dated? Well, cars happened. Marin happened. It was a desirable place to go. People got in the ferry and came over on the weekend, back and forth. They brought their cars, they brought themselves, they brought their picnic baskets, they brought the train, and our anchorage went into the smoke. Right? Every time, ferry went by, they had to wait. So they had to go. They had to leave that space. And a big project ensued to try and find a suitable place to be.
Not like the curve.
And among the first places that they hoped to go was back to San Francisco. And they were working with the park and rec people. And one of them was a member, so it should have been easy to find a place to buy because they wanted to buy waterfront property. But everybody knows about Belvedere Cove. This picture was taken in 1915. The kid at the helm of that powerboat was Carol McKinney, And Carol McKinney is famous for two things. A, this is three. The antecedent, that is, how come? They used to come from San Francisco and stay in the hotel because the weather was so nice during the summer. And at 15, he was tootling around and doing all this stuff. In World War I, he was the youngest submarine pilot in the Navy. He was under 21 when he was driving the sub in World War I. He went on in his father's footsteps, finished medical school, and in World War II, he was a naval physician. More importantly, you see how enormous and gorgeous that hotel was. Operative word is was. So on Christmas morning, this huge storm happened in Belvedere Cove, and the waves came crashing in. And if you talk to Jeff Allen, his grandfather's Stevens cruiser is pictured in the middle of Beach Road. So we all think this never happens here. We always think about, oh, that's where the hurricanes come in the Caribbean, and that's where that kind of stuff happened. No, it happened right here. This was a time when the Belvedere Hotel was going in the toilet. People could come over here on the ferry, they could bring their cars, they could drive around. They didn't need to have a part-time residence in Belvedere. So in the board meeting of 1935, or 25, excuse me, we have these wonderful things happening. The subcommittee was commissioned to sort of talk to the bankruptcy people about the Belvedere Hotel. Vice Commodore Cliff Smith was supposed to find maybe a station in Pebble Beach. Who would like that, huh? Well, it wasn't until 1947 that the Stillwater Yacht Club happened, but Cliff had an idea. There was another group that wanted to build or open a station in Lake Tahoe. Now, the Tahoe Yacht Club has a date of about 1927, so we would have had a little harder time elbowing them out. But that was the plan. And then there was this meeting in August where Cliff Smith is empowered by the board to buy the property. Now, at this point, all options were still on the table. It wasn't like we had to move to Belvedere, but we had this great deal. So he went and negotiated with the bankruptcy officers, and a century ago, he bought the property. Imagine, October 1925. And we paid this princely sum for all of those tide lots and the dry lots. And of course, we were in bed with the Belvedere Dam Company to help make that happen. And Harry Allen was a very prominent member of this yacht club. And he was facilitating, and the deal was that we would split tide lots 2/3, 1/3. The land company got the 1/3 that was right in front of their rental units, that are still their rental units, so that it would guarantee water access for them. And we got all the rest. So here are the leaders that kind of made that happen. John Piter was the Commodore when the meeting occurred in San Francisco, where there was a great split in the discussion. Let's move to Belvedere. No, we have a deal. We've got an independent deal. We can rent on a long-term basis this abandoned building in the marina. What do you suppose that is? Yeah. The Municipal Marina Yacht Club. Oh, the St. Francis. So, but these guys now were on the hook because they had spent $23,000 to buy this place that was damn difficult to get to, and we didn't have a clubhouse. You can see the state of the Belvedere Hotel because that storm surge stove in the bottom floor windows and filled it with water. So how did we get to Belvedere? That's how. And then what happened? Well, if you envision yourself as the leader of this yacht club, and it is your job to make sure that the club understands the value of that purchase, you better damn well figure out how to make it work. And the Pacific Motorboat Club was essentially vacant, and it was owned by the Belvedere Land Company. And this year, Howard B. Allen, president of the Belvedere Land Company, was vice commodore at the San Francisco Yacht Club, and that made the negotiation for the rents of this building pretty easy. So in 1927, we have a space to be in the yacht club. We are renting it for the exorbitant price of $150 a month. And we have a ways, so you can pull your boat right there. And I know Jerry and I both remember that ways, because we used to walk the beach as kids, and it was there then. Barely operational. Okay, so what did he do? Well, there's a flyer, of course, and here's the flyer. It says, no, we're not in that place where the boats are flying back and forth because of the damn ferry wakes. No, we're in this beautiful place where you have warm water and you can swim. You can take a canoe out and take your honey out. And there's a wonderful picture of Howie Allen in a canoe with this sophomore, junior in high school in the front of it, rowing, and it appeared in the, would you believe, Independent Journal. Now, the other cool thing was, none of us know that, but there was a 9-hole classic California golf course. And they made a deal with the golf and tennis club. So for being a member of the yacht club, you also got privileges to play golf. So we put that up on our flyer, and then we put the price on. $5 a month dues. Anybody remember anything close to that? And $50 now if you pay the initiation fee. But on July 1st, it's going up to $100. And by the way, you could bring your car because the ferries came to Tiburon too. Now those of us that grew up here and were little kids when there was still a railroad, understand that the railroad still operated a barge traffic for freight, largely lumber, across the bay in the early and mid-50s. So we all know that that happened, but it's hard to believe how dominant it was on the Marin shoreline or on the Tiburon shoreline back then. So part of the celebration of that 1927 was to celebrate opening day. Unfortunately, we missed the first weekend in May because we weren't quite organized enough. But this is our opening day, and Tom Crowley was a member of the club. You may know Crowley Tug and Barge, very important part of the infrastructure of the Northwest. Well, that's his ferry, and we made it opening day, and people came to new clubhouse, enjoyed their day, went back for a tour of the bay, and then were delivered home in San Francisco. So that was a big time celebration, and it meant we were here. We weren't quite here to stay, but we were damn close. So an architect, his name is Gunderson, he was a member. And the big plan was to take these tide lots and fill them, and then put basically a destination recreation complex. 24 hotel rooms, about 30 bunk beds for male quarters, the whole thing. This is on the wall on the other side of this one, and it is honestly about to die. But it was brand new, bright pastel, and it was on display at Gump's in San Francisco, just off Union Square, in 1928 and 29, trying to attract more members. Because we still had a lot to do to pay for. Oh, and by the way, we offered the land company $25,000 for the entire waterfront of the Belvedere Lagoon. Needless to say, they said no. We even used this picture in our PICYA yearbook, and this is just from 1930, but you see this magnificent development. And then what happened? Well, remember I talked about the panic? Well, let's talk about the impact of the crash. The Great Depression happened. And so we didn't have any money. Poor Gunderson threatened to quit the club because they couldn't pay his fees. And they said, oh, no, you can't quit. We're gonna keep you on and we'll forgive your dues. So it was like that. It was so much like that when we built the 98 Beach Road, which we'll get to in just a second, people got to work off their obligation to the club by doing labor to help build the clubhouse. So it was squeaky tight, which we should all be so grateful for. Celebrating the grand opening of 98 Beach Road. This is a new picture of the same thing that we used to do in Sausalito annually. So this is the entire membership of the club, unless somebody didn't come. In 1934. And I guess we'd have to say we're here to stay. Here's another picture of the club, and this is about 1936, and there's sort of lots of fun things about this picture. The first is you can date it because the Annie's mast is in the yard as our flagpole. That was put up in 1936. The other thing that's fun about this, and so I'm probably a year off, it's probably 1937, is that if you look really closely here, there are a whole bunch of people there. And we used to celebrate May Day in Belvedere. In that, we'll call it a square, even though we know it's an oval. So this is a picture taken before any construction started in 1932, and all that's left is a little piece of dock that's basically footing for the hotel. And today, that very same picture looks like this. So to say we're here to stay is an understatement. Thank you.
actually have enough time. We're taking this out in 45 minutes. We have time for any questions if there are any. I'll have it to you.
Again, great talk. How many members were there in the club when we moved here?
There were about 80. It sort of went 80 and 80.
80 went back.
And of course, most of the money did too. Except for Ivan. Ivan put a lot of his own money into making it happen.
Ken?
How many fires have we had?
I have to get closer.
Sorry, how many fires have we had?
How many fires have we had? One, 1897. Thank God. We had one fire in the harbor, but that doesn't count because it didn't hurt the building.
Ken?
Can you go back one slide? Is that the old Cove House in the very left corner of your picture?
Oh, went the wrong way, sorry. Yes. That is the paint house. And you did notice that this pillars in both pictures, just to be sure we're oriented.
What's the motor lodge and which one on the right side, Ken?
I'm sorry?
Identify the building to the right. Where's the old lodge and motor lodge?
These are the farm cottages,
Uh-huh.
and adjacent to that is the China cabin.
Ken, was China Cabin already there in that picture?
What?
Was China Cabin already there in that picture?
Yeah.
Yes.
An early idea on how to finance the building of the harbor was Commodore Smith's subdivision of the edge of Belvedere Cove. He was going to build houses on the whole edge of the cove, and it was approved by the city hall. But luckily, well, not luckily, but the Depression came along and that idea didn't work. And they had to wait till 1957.
Now, there's more than one element to that story. Because there were actually plans and there was discussion in 1954 to build 8 lots along Beach Road. And the name of the street in front of those lots was Embarcadero Way. If you wonder if there's any vestiges of that left, the Von Schultheis house at the very end is number 1 Embarcadero Way. They were going to put a big dock down more in the middle of the cove and build a harbor off of it. Yes, did you hear, and then I'll get your question. Did you hear what Mel said? In order to build the dog leg in the breakwater so that access to the 300 finger would be easier and we'd be able to develop that part, we exchanged the lot at that dog leg in the breakwater for a lot at the end of the harbor. And he had the property directly up the hill and owned the tide lot and the house above. So the tragedy for all of us is that he died in the middle of his second year as Commodore. And so all the details about how we would deal with that property and how he would fell apart. And his widow sold the property. And here we are.
Since this is the San Francisco Yacht Club, how much is this still the San Francisco Yacht Club in the view of the people of San Francisco?
So, I'm about to do that. So I was going to say this challenging question is, So this is a San Francisco Yacht Club. What do the people in San Francisco think of that? And it's mighty late for that part of the discussion.
I will say John is from St. Francis, and he did do a small dig in your speech, so I think he can.
It's quite okay. I have friends over there too, a damn few.
Any other questions? Nice job, Ken. Thanks for being here.